Hello, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. It's always nice to talk to you all. I just want to begin by talking to Norman. On From Russia with Love, having worked on Dr. No, was it less challenging when you got to From Russia with Love?
The big difference between Dr. No and Rush with Love was, of course, the budget. The budget on Dr. No was absolutely unbelievable, and I still look back now and think, how was that film ever made for $1 million and a bit? It just doesn't make any sense. The sets alone, you would have thought, would have cost that. And it was very sad for me because it was my first chance to be promoted to sound effects editor. And I knew from my training from working with one of the most legendary sound editors in the business that all the very difficult challenges throughout the sound needed to be tackled very early on so that they were out of the way. Difficult sounds that you knew were going to have to go into a recording theatre and mix various tracks together to make that one track. And I looked at Dr. No and I knew that there were sounds there that were going to have to be created. The silenced pistol was an obvious one. The car crashing down the cliff obviously needed to be done. When he was crawling through the tunnel with all the water crashing over him, that was another one. And of course, the crushing of the idol by Dr. No's hand. And so I went ahead with the normal procedure and went into recording theatres and made these sounds. And I could not believe it. I got a rocket from the management saying, Norman, you are costing us a fortune. Something's got to change. Luckily, they were already made, so it was too late for them to correct it. But that shows you how desperately short of money they were on that picture. And so when we got on to Russia with Love, I had no idea how much the budget had changed. So immediately I started to look for challenges, and the obvious one was the gypsy camp, because that was meant to have been in Turkey, but it was shot on the back lot at Pinewood. Somehow I had to bring that to a Turkish scene, and the obvious thing was to bring in lots of Turkish voices so that from the moment you entered that scene, all you would hear was Turkish. And so I went into the production office, tongue-in-cheek, and they said, what do you want, Norman? I said, I want 10 Turkish men, 10 Turkish women, and as many Russians as you can get. And he looked up at the calendar. He said, would Thursday be all right? I thought, now we're making movies. Now we're making movies. And that was the huge difference. Now I could relax. And it just shows you what the budget means to a film and how staggering it is that Dr. No was made for the budget it was. Yeah, definitely.
And Graham, you on From Russia with Love as well. Was it the screen test that you helped with?
On Russia with Love, yeah. I mean, I was very, very young. I was probably 17, I think. I'd just joined Pinewood Studios as a boom operator's assistant, but I was given the challenge of being the actual boom operator on some artist tests for Russia with Love, which consisted of a very beautiful young woman in bed with nothing on except a black thing round her neck. Well, obviously I couldn't believe this. I was being paid for this. And I was so much enjoying my work when I was paid probably a couple of pounds more than my ex-colleagues at school who'd gone into what we call proper jobs. But anyway, I've loved every day of working in films throughout my whole career.
And Colin, you of course worked on Octopussy. I was wondering what the highlights were of Octopussy, maybe perhaps the plane sequence at the climax of the film?
Can you hear me? Yes, very challenging, as is all the action sequences. I assume you're talking about the twin-engine aircraft?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right. Yes, a lot of that was shot by second unit, other than where the main artists were concerned. The plane sort of, as you know, sort of takes off and flies, and there's the fight outside the plane. during the thing. So obviously, sort of a lot of that was all shot mute, sort of POV. So I then had to create the necessary sounds. Now, that was a particular kind of aircraft with particularly radial engines. In those days, we had sound libraries, but there was nothing in there that would suffice for the visuals that I was expected to match. So I went to the office and spoke to them, and they spoke to a company specialising in older aircraft, and they found this aircraft down in Wiltshire that had identical engines on it. So the plan was that we would go down there. Now, when we arrived, we were told that, yes, the aircraft was exactly what we wanted, but it did not have a certificate of airworthiness. So there was nothing we could actually do air-wise. So we had to completely simulate the action that we see in the air on the ground. So we explained to the pilot what we were after and what we would do. So we set about, and the first thing to do was the startups. So we would record one single engine with a lovely pop and bang that many radial engines used to do it at that time. Then we would do the second engine, and then we'd then do a combination of both, and we would then have them rev up and drop back and rev up and drop back and then sustain to match the visual of what was going on in the sky. So all the exteriors absolutely fine. So we then needed to do the matching interiors. So with the sound recordist, we climbed on board, but given that it couldn't fly, but we had to simulate a takeoff and prior to the crash as well. So we set off on the runway, and we gained speed, and all of a sudden we were caught in a crosswind, and we took off flying up to about 100 feet for about a quarter of a mile, and the pilot had to sort of quickly throttle back and bring it back down to earth again. So that was a little bit frightening, but a very exciting time with that aircraft. And I had to say that when we applied the tracks to the film, also complementing it with other sound effects like the stupid kind of noise that goes with most of the Bond films, it all worked out extremely well.
I was wondering how important stock sounds are in terms of, is it 50-50? You think you'll create a certain amount of sounds, and how much do you rely on from the archives?
Yes, there were, in those days, certain sound libraries that had material that we could draw upon, but most of the material that we used, we actually manufactured ourselves, like as I say, the aircraft, or a car chase, motorbike chase, boat chase, and also, as has been alluded to, the airship. We then had to record ourselves, and that in itself was a challenge.
And Norman, I believe that you relied quite heavily on, say, the BBC radiophonic sound for some of your Bond films.
Yeah. It's. I think one has to accept that the Bond films, with all their gadgets and their futuristic type of plots, the actual sound industry at that time was just lagging that bit behind. And there were certain sounds that were virtually impossible to achieve in our normal way of working. And it was purely by chance that somebody mentioned to me that there was a company called the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. And I'd never heard about them, but then I got to know that they were actually started to investigate making futuristic type of music for space-type pictures, to give the music a completely different atmosphere. And in Goldfinger, when we had the very, very thin beam came down when he was strapped to the platform, I knew that there was no sound library would have had a sound for that. I could hear it in my mind, but it was pointless to go to a sound effects library. And so I thought, well, there's no harm done. And I gave the workshop a call. A guy came out, looked at the shot, I told him exactly what I wanted, and within a week he sent me the exact sound I wanted. And you can't put a price on that because, as I say, the sound industry was lagging behind. And when it comes to You Only Live Twice, people ask me about the rockets, the rocket that went out and the rocket that came back. And I would love to be able to say, oh, yeah, well, I mixed some tracks together. But no, that was virtually impossible. It would have taken me hours and hours of work to have come for something that was realistic. And so I went back to the radiophonic workshop, and I said, look, if you could just give me one basic stem, one basic sound of increasing or decreasing, and I will then add to that and build the track. And when they sent the sound back, it was complete. Everything about it was there, all the changes, the thing. Even Peter Hunt said the rocket sound, he said, I love it. And that was, and I'd love to be able to say that was me, but no, I couldn't there. And I think it's worth just mentioning that when the sound department at Pinewood Studios first saw the first cut of Dr. No, I know what happened there. They sat there and they thought to themselves, there's just a chance here that we might be able to contribute to the film rather than just complement it. Sound so often complements the film. People hear the sound and you accept that that's what you would expect. But there are times in the Bonds where the sound has that little bit of extra contribution, and they realised that. And the chief mixer at Pinewood Studios was a man called McCullum, Gordon McCullum. And you didn't want to cross Gordon. He was a pretty tough guy, and he didn't take fools gladly. And if things were going wrong, his temper was unbelievable. But I'd heard that they had watched the first cut, and about half an hour later, there was a tap on my door in my cutting room. And I opened it, and who was standing there, looking like a little boy looking for sweets? It was Gordon McCullum. And he said, when can we start? And he knew that there were lots of interesting sounds there that were going to have to be created, not got from library, not recorded in a theatre. They had to be created, and he couldn't wait. And that shows you something about Bond sound.
Do you guys have a favourite film that you worked on that you're particularly proud of? Graham?
Well, for a Bond film, I enjoyed working on them all, as has been mentioned here many times. Working for Cubby was like being in a family, and we all knew what to. We knew what to expect, and they knew what we were expected to do, and thoroughly enjoyed. I used to love going to work every day. But as far as a favourite, it's very hard to find one. I mean, the one probably maybe most proud of was GoldenEye, because at least we did get nominated for Best Sound for a BAFTA. We didn't win like an Oscar like Norman. But I think that was probably the first nomination that a Bond film for sound had received for sound since GoldenEye. I'd have to check that out. But anyway, that was very satisfying. Didn't win, of course, but that was very satisfying. And I just love working with everyone. We got to make some very good relationships with the rest of the crew and the directors, and loved every day of it.
Colin?
Yes. As we know, sort of each Bond film presents its own challenges in terms of chases and fights, etc. But for me, I think it is probably Moonraker, by virtue of the fact being that not only did we have the earthly elements to deal with, but we then had the space scenes. Now, only sort of really Stanley Kubrick and Cuarón sort of worked on the principle there is no sound in space. Well, of course, that is no good for a Bond movie. So the one big challenge that I had was for all the lasers. Now, we know guns and pistols, the sounds that they make, but nobody knew what a laser sounded like. But of course, a laser doesn't sound. So the challenge then was to as Norman alluded to, finding something somewhere, somehow, to come up with a laser sound. On speaking to the office, I can't remember who it was now, but somebody knew somebody in a music studio in London that has gizmos, is the best way to describe it. So it was arranged that I and my assistant would go to this said studio, and we met up with this guy who had what is known as a synthesizer. We'd already bought this guy down, but because during the negotiations as to what we wanted, we brought him down and showed him some of the sequences. We were saying, this is a laser, this is a laser cannon, this is a laser pistol, this is a laser rifle, and we need something to complement these visuals. So we then descended upon the said studio and sat down with his laser, and we spent the whole morning going through various sequences of sound and frequencies, and eventually we were able to tie down various sounds, saying, well, this would be good for the laser cannon, this would be good for the laser rifle, this would be good for the laser pistol. So we made multiple recordings of all these static little shots, because it was like a machine gun visually, and each one had to be fitted individually. It wasn't like a machine gun going brrr, bang, 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 bang. So each one had to be fitted individually to each one in turn. But I'm glad to say that sort of at the end of the day, on showing it to John Glenn here, Cubby and Lewis Gilbert, they were very happy with the results that we'd come up with. So the whole battle scene in space was a great challenge, but we met it, and I think we conquered it.
Yeah, good. Well done.
Norman, do you have a favourite sound? Or sorry, Glenn.
No, I was just saying I can add to that because, as Colin says, each individual laser shot was fitted absolutely to the picture, and the next process, when it reached us in the mix theatre, as the effects mixer, we would attempt to pan every sound effect and stereo according to where it was on screen. Well, it was quite a hectic scene, and we put them all up, and we sort of just started by panning one set left, one set centre, one set right, and we played it through, and it was so busy and so fussy, we thought, I don't think we can do anything to improve that, and so that's the way it stayed. And so our couple of hours that we set by to premix the lasers was taken over in about 5 minutes.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Norman, do you have a favourite sound that you produced?
It's very difficult when you've worked on 5 or 6 Bonds to single out. But the one aspect of those films that I will never ever forget is Dr. No, for the simple reason that, as I said, the sound technology in those days was very, 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 very difficult as regards the futuristic nature of the Bond movies. And the one sound that was always on my brain right the way through the time we had to prepare for the dubbing was Bond turning the wheel at the end. Those of you that were here last year, you've heard this story before, but it's very important to me because I've never known tension like it. I knew that we needed a machine that had a nice, when you switched it on, it had a nice electronic boom, 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 because it was representing the nuclear reactor. And then we had to have a machine that not only had that sound, but also had a control that you could slowly increase. As Bond turned the wheel, we would synchronize it. And I tried, but I mean, there's only so much time you have. There's so much to do when you're doing the soundtrack of a film of that type. So much of the sound is not usable and you're having to replace it. But all the time in the back of my brain was, Norm, you've got to find that machine. Some of my mates used to say, you better go to America to the space agency. They might have something there. And I said, no, that's not funny. You know, this is serious. And when they started to mix the tracks together, which we called dubbing, they were working their way through. I think there were 12 reels and they had reached 11. and I still hadn't got a sound for that wheel. Now, this was so serious. Like, the tension still, even now talking about it, I get a bit hot under the collar. And in desperation, I went to the guy in again, Pinewood Sound Department, who used to maintain all the electronic equipment there. And I said to him, I told him my problem. I said, please, is there anything you can conceive here? He said, Norm, what can I say? But I'll give it some thought. And a couple of days later, because they were now reaching reel 12, he called me to the mixing theatre or the recording theatre, and he pointed to a bit of gadgetry that absolutely my heart stopped. It was so crude, bits of this, bits of that, wires, bits of... Whew, I said. He said, no, and he showed me a switch, which I pressed, and it went, wom, 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 wom. I said, oh, but he said, no, and he pointed to another thing. I turned it, and it went, wom, 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 wom. And everyone in the recording theatre said, you have invented a sound, mate. No one could believe it. It just didn't seem possible that a guy that's job was to maintain equipment could invent a machine of that capability. And so I just, we synchronized it to the thing, and everybody in the mixing theatre just assumed that was the sound we had. Nobody knew what went behind that, nobody. And so...
Does anybody have a question or two for the panelists? Any questions? Yep. Okay.
I have a question for Norman. At the start of Dr. No, when the gun barrel begins, we hear this beeping noises or something before the Bond theme starts. Do you know what those noises are? Do you still remember it?
I remember the chap came to me. I was given the job of sitting with him on the moviola, and he had that sound, and he also had the dots. Where he got the sound from, I never knew. It could have been from the workshop. I think that's probably where he got them from. But I'd like to think that I was offering it, but I couldn't. A lot of people ask that question.
Yeah. Was that the bit that Daphne Oram did? Was that a different part? Because she works in the workshop, didn't she, Daphne Oram? Did she contribute some part of that sound?
Sorry?
Daphne Oram.
She worked at the workshop.
Ah, I think you're right. Yes, there was a lady there, wasn't there? That
I think she contributed that bit. It's in her.
I think she did too. Yeah, that answers your question, really, doesn't it?
Can I ask a question on Admiral's there? Was that some of the sounds? Did you use that, in the sequence when Bond's crawling through the tunnel and you've got all those sort of futuristic sound effects that are echoing down the what would you call that tunnel he crawls through? The shaft, yeah. Was that some of the sounds? Did you reuse some of the sounds for that? Can you remember?
Are you talking about the electronic sound that followed him around, then twanged when he dropped?
Yeah, was that the workshop as well where you got those from?
Well, no. What happened was what you do, you have a list of sounds that you're pretty certain you can get from a sound effects library. You go there and you sit there and you go through the list and listen and say, oh, I'll have that, no, I don't have that. And you come away with various sounds that you know are going to be invaluable to you. And while I was sitting there, I heard this sound. I said to the librarian, I said, what's that? They said, oh, don't worry, sorry, that's my mate over there just running. I said, no, I'm interested, because the moment I heard it, I thought of the tunnel. It was just one of those funny things, And I said, well, I'll have a copy of it anyway, and I took it back. But I knew that there was music over that sequence. So I knew that I couldn't just announce that I was going to put that over it if the composer was going to compose for it. So on the chart, you have all the tracks are on a chart for the mixers to see what's coming up. I just put it there as a sort of alternative. And I wasn't there when they were mixing that reel. And apparently when they heard the music, they said, oh, not sure about that. Has Norman got anything? And sure enough, they ran it. And when I saw the mix, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I think what sold them on it was that twang that gave him a reason to drop. Unbelievable, really.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yep.
And that was made by the electronic workshop. Yeah.
I'll use Goldfinger as an example. Gert Frober's dialogue was overdubbed. Was the skill for the lip sync there down to you gentlemen, or was it down to the voice artist?
Yes.
I think I'm right in saying.
Cubby was very upset.
Yeah, there's the skill of actually somebody coming in and revoicing him. And did you have anything to do with Michael Collins, basically?
Michael Collins, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was a big shock to Cubby because they assumed that he could speak English, you know. But in point of fact, what he planned to do was to learn it the night before and then say it. That was quite a shock because, you know, you're in the middle of shooting and you've got your actor all prepared and everything. And so it was obvious that it would have to be a revoice. And I remember all the different actors that were brought in, and I was just given the job of syncing them up as best I could so that we could sit back and listen to them all. And what was the guy's name again? Collins.
Michael Collins.
Michael Collins, yes. And even though I was only doing sound effects on the Bonds and I had dialogue to do on other films, but from my experience, I have never seen a performance of revoicing like that. I still look at Goldfinger and it just goes right over my head that it's a revoice because it has everything. It has the threat, it has the accent, and it has the sync. Unbelievable, really.
Do we have a final question?
I don't know if that answers your question.
No,
Does
it was wonderful. Thank you.
There we go. Any more last question?
Yeah. I was just wondering, how long does it take you to mix the sound in after the films? Because I guess you're working a bit after the film is all finished. So generally, how long does that take? And what element, sort of roughly, how much of the original can you keep, or is there not much at all that you keep?
Are you talking about all the Bonds?
Yeah, just generally when you're mixing a Bond film, like how long are you working after the main shoot has taken place?
About the same. If it took 12 weeks to shoot the film, we would have about 12 weeks to post-synchronize and prepare for the dub. The thing was, on Bond films, I would think about 50 or 60% of the soundtrack was put on one side, especially when you've got people being revoiced, because once that comes out, every element of that track's got to be replaced. You know, it's not just that voice. What about the atmosphere, the footsteps, the birds, and all the rest of it? All got to be replaced. A lot of work. Yeah.
Did the time you get on later Bond films, Graham and Colin, did that time stay, or did it get tighter with budgets? Or
Well, it used to take us to mix a Bond film about 10 mixing weeks, and they were long days. Cubby looked after us very well, and we did work long days, but he fed us well and looked after us well. When we had two theatres at Pinewood next door to one another that were similarly equipped, we, given that Bond post-production schedules are always very tight, and they are one of the few movies that actually sticks to their schedule, we managed to organise to get 10 dubbing weeks by using two theatres simultaneously. So for a number of the James Bond films, the dialogue pre-mixing was done in one theatre, the effects pre-mixing done in another, then the whole lot would come over to the first theatre to be finally mixed, while the other theatre, again, to meet the deadlines, was starting on the foreign language versions. And so we managed to compress our 10 weeks into 5 actual weeks, 10 weeks mixing into 5 weeks.
And Colin, did you, just to finish off, did you have any sounds that took very last minute problems to solve?
No, I mean, as I said, you know, there are challenges in nearly all the chase sequences, but one challenge that I particularly enjoyed doing was the airship. Now, a lot of the material some of it was model, a lot of it was air to air, and then you had the sets mainly interior. So there is nothing available in terms of sound library for the airship. So once again, I go to the office and say, look, we've got this problem. And they said, well, look, we have a deal with Airship Industries. You'll have to go out and record it. So there we were one cold November day going out into Bedfordshire to Airship Industries. They wheel out this huge, great airship. But prior to this, we'd brought the pilots down to the studio, showed them the sequence and what we were after. And they went away somewhat bemused because they were used to just flying around, just doing very gentle things. But of course, that was no good for us. So as I say, we arrived there on this cold November day, and we start off. But our first challenge was communication. We were on the ground, but we wanted them flying towards us, over us, round us, and whatever. So we couldn't communicate electronically. So we worked out a series where I would have to do it just by waving my arms. So we started recording, but there I was looking like a demented New York traffic cop, waving my arms left, right, and centre, up, down, forward, sideways, to give the pilots what I wanted to do. So I would wave my hands, and I would say, raise my hand up and down to speed up, slow down, turn round, turn left, turn right. But that in itself was exciting. But then we came to do exactly the same thing for the interiors. So we climb into this small gondola slung underneath, which is about the size of getting into a minivan. And we took off and we pulled up to about 100 feet and the pilot stopped. They said, well, we're just checking a few things. And all of a sudden, the nose of the airship started to go down. And we went to about an angle of about 40 degrees, and they were just moving the water ballast for one reason or another. Whether it was to wind us up, I'm not quite sure. But it was kind of scary, just in midair, hanging, looking down at 40 degrees. Anyway, we brought it back up again. And we reenacted once again everything we'd done exterior, and then back to the studio, and then applying it over the sets and the intercuts with the models, and putting it all together. At the end of the day, it worked out extremely well, and was very pleased with the results. And I think everybody else was as well.
And well, thank you very much, guys, for joining us. It's been great. Thank you.